The first time the convoy turned off Highway 115 toward the mesa, the man in shackles whispered one sentence, "So this is where ghosts are made." If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. It was a cold morning in Colorado, the kind that freezes breath before it leaves the lungs. The Federal Bureau of Prisons had rerouted the transfer at the last minute, quietly, without notifying the media or even some field agents. The man in the back seat, an international terrorism suspect whose name had stirred headlines across 3 continents, was headed to the one place built to outlast ideology, ADX Florence. Inside the gates, everything tightened. The air, the silence, the distance between human voices. ADX wasn't just a prison, it was a message written in steel and concrete. A place designed for the inmates the world considered too dangerous to exist anywhere else. Here, cells sealed like vaults, each one an island. Here, the outside world didn't disappear, it dissolved. As the guards processed him, they avoided eye contact. Not from fear, but from training. Men like him weren't to be acknowledged. They were to be managed, contained, neutralized. For years, he had been passed between intelligence agencies, interrogated in languages he barely understood, accused of orchestrating attacks overseas. And now, he was about to be housed in the same facility that had quietly absorbed figures from the most explosive chapters of modern history. The officers moved him down the tier. Their boots rang against the steel walkway, steady, synced, practiced. ADX had seen foreign nationals before, men tied to global plots, men whose cases had shaped diplomatic tensions. But something about this transfer felt different. Too quiet. Too urgent. And too secret. When his cell door locked behind him, the metallic slam ricocheted like a final verdict. The window slit allowed only a strip of sky, nothing more. His schedule, now dictated by timers, 23 hours of total isolation, 1 hour in a concrete recreation pen barely larger than the cell itself. Meals passed through a slot. Showers under constant surveillance. Every conversation recorded. Every movement logged. But the unusual part wasn't the isolation, that was standard. It was the cell next to his. The one the staff didn't talk about. On his second night, long after lights out, he heard it, a faint tapping. Too rhythmic to be accidental. Too deliberate to be ignored. He pressed his ear to the wall. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps again. It continued for minutes. Then silence. The next morning, a guard asked him a question he hadn't expected. "Did you sleep?" He nodded. The guard leaned in slightly. "Good. Keep it that way." There was warning in the tone. A warning attached to something the staff wasn't allowed to discuss. Something, or someone, housed within these same corridors under conditions even more extreme than his. By the end of the week, he began noticing patterns. Officers shifting their routes. Supervisors monitoring specific doors. Even the special security unit walking the tier twice as often. ADX didn't change routines for just anyone. Whatever lay behind the silence of that neighboring cell, it wasn't routine. And on his 7th night, the tapping returned, only this time it wasn't a pattern. It was a message. A short, chilling sequence he recognized from his past. A code he had hoped never to hear again. He stepped back from the wall, pulse hammering, realizing exactly what it meant, and who it pointed to. The prison hadn't just taken him. It had brought someone else with him. Someone who knew him. Someone who should have been half a world away. Someone whose presence at ADX could only mean one thing. The tapping came again the next night, slower this time, as if whoever was sending it was weighing every beat. 3 long taps, 2 short, 1 long. He hadn't heard that pattern since his detention overseas, back when covert interrogations blurred into days of heat, darkness, and confusion. It was a code used by detainees to signal cooperation or collapse. And whoever was using it now wasn't sending a friendly greeting. He stepped back from the wall, realizing that ADX wasn't just warehousing him. It was aligning him. correctional officers changed their pace on the tier. They spoke in clipped tones, avoiding unnecessary noise. Even their eyes carried a new stiffness, the kind reserved for events not listed in the daily briefing sheets. Something had shifted behind the scenes. Down the hall, a door unlocked, heavy, mechanical, deliberate. Footsteps followed. Not the regular rhythm of guards on patrol, but a slower, more deliberate walk. The kind used when carrying out orders that didn't belong on paper. He stayed still, listening. A voice echoed faintly, "Cell inspection. Stand back." The order wasn't for him. It came from a direction closer to the source of the tapping. But even through solid concrete, he could hear agitation. Metal scraping. A short, muffled protest. Then silence so sudden it felt unnatural. Later, during his allotted recreation time in the enclosed concrete pen, he noticed something unusual. A second officer, one he had never seen on his detail before, stood behind the observation glass. Not a standard CO. The uniform was the same, but the stance wasn't. Shoulders squared. Arms still. Expression blank. The posture of someone trained to interrogate, not supervise exercise. The hour ended early. Back in his cell, he found his meal tray delivered late. When the slot opened, a guard muttered without looking up, "Keep your head down." You didn't hear anything. That was when the pressure started to build. Foreign terrorism cases were always political, but placement at ADX carried deeper implications. The facility housed individuals whose actions had reshaped international borders, whose trials had influenced treaties, sanctions, even wars. When those inmates ended up in Colorado, it wasn't because the federal government wanted them forgotten. It was because they wanted them controlled. And sometimes, control meant proximity. He replayed the tapping in his mind. The meaning was unmistakable. It was the same sequence a former associate had used during interrogations years earlier, a man who claimed he'd never cooperate, who swore death was better than imprisonment. A man rumored to have disappeared after being handed to a foreign intelligence service. If that man was now at ADX, then something had gone very wrong overseas. On his 8th night, everything snapped into place. The lights on the tier flickered, only for a second, but long enough to break routine. In ADX, even a 1-second deviation mattered. Alarms didn't sound, but doors locked at staggered intervals, out of sync with the usual sequence. Then came the sound he had been waiting for, the faintest whisper through a ventilation seam. A voice shaped by exhaustion, thin but unmistakable. "They brought us here for the same reason." He froze. "You know why," the voice continued, barely audible. "And you know what they want." He stepped closer, breath tight. "What do they want?" he whispered back. Silence, until a slow, deliberate exhale drifted through the vent, followed by a single sentence, "To decide which one of us breaks first." He felt the weight of the walls close in. This wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. ADX had become a pressure chamber, one built not just for isolation, but for influence. By the time the footsteps returned, heavier than before, he understood the truth. He wasn't here because of what he'd allegedly done. He was here because of what someone wanted him to confirm. Or deny. And when the lights cut again, longer this time, he realized something even worse. Someone inside ADX wasn't following orders anymore. The next morning, the silence had weight. It felt engineered, like the entire unit was holding its breath. Guards avoided lingering on the tier. Supervisors spoke in unlocked, hurried whispers. Even the hum of the ventilation seemed sharper, as if the walls themselves were listening. He sat on the edge of his bunk, replaying the last thing the voice had told him, to decide which one of us breaks first. Pressure wasn't new to him. But ADX was different. Pressure here wasn't physical. It was psychological, quiet, deliberate, relentless. Designed to fracture certainty without ever leaving a mark. That afternoon, a lieutenant appeared at his door. Step back. Hands visible. The tone wasn't hostile, just precise. When the door opened, the lieutenant didn't look directly at him. Instead, he handed over a single sheet of paper through a gloved hand. Barely more than a paragraph. Summons to an interview room. No reason provided. No rights listed. Just a location and time. Inside ADX, that alone was unusual. He was escorted through corridors he hadn't seen before, longer, colder, lined with reinforced panels. The kind of hallway used for special management procedures, far from the ordinary movement routes. The interview room was brightly lit, intentionally claustrophobic. A bolted table. 2 chairs. A camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. 2 officials entered. Not COs. Not intelligence agency recognized. Their badges identified them only as Federal Review Staff, a term broad enough to mean anything and nothing. "We need clarification," one said. "About your past associations," the other added. "Specifically, your contact overseas." He said nothing. Silence was often the only leverage a prisoner had. The first official leaned forward. "Your neighbor is talking. He's contradicting your statements. You know what inconsistencies lead to." He held their stare. He had heard this tactic before, years ago, continents away. Except this time, the walls were American. The expectations, the pressure, the consequences, still the same. When they realized he wouldn't respond, they ended the session abruptly. No threats. No promises. Just a thinly veiled warning, "You'll want to reconsider before he decides the story for both of you." Back in his cell, he waited for the tapping. Hours passed. Nothing. Night fell. Still nothing. The quiet was worse than any code. The absence meant something had changed. Then, well past midnight, officers rushed onto the tier. Their radios hissed. Their boots thundered with urgency ADX rarely showed. Doors sealed. Lights strobed once before locking into a harsh, white brightness. A supervisor barked orders down the hallway. "Secure every cell. No movement. No exceptions." He pressed his ear to the wall. Still nothing. Not a tap. Not a whisper. Just a single realization settling like cold water in his chest. Whatever happened to the man next door had happened quickly and intentionally. The next morning, his breakfast tray arrived with a folded note tucked beneath the carton. Contraband at ADX was nearly impossible, which made the message even heavier. 5 words. Handwritten. Precise. He broke. "You're next. Decide." No signature. No hint of who delivered it. But he didn't need one. The story wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It wasn't about ideology. It was about leverage, how nations moved pieces across continents and ended up here, in a Colorado cell block built to keep secrets colder than the mountain air above it. By evening, he understood the real function of ADX and international terror policy. It wasn't simply a prison. It was a pressure chamber for global decisions, silent, controlled, and far from the public eye. And as the lights dimmed, he realized the final truth. In a place designed to break men without touching them, silence could be weaponized just as easily as sound. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.